Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board.
A diesel-powered engine on a farm works hard and operates in a grueling environment. Soy biodiesel fuels stand up to the challenge of powering farm equipment, but are also renewable and environmentally responsible as well. The Nebraska Soybean Board is committed to encouraging the use of soy biodiesel to protect the environment and sustain Nebraska's agriculture. The Nebraska Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.
Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board. The Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.
Welcome to this week's edition of Market Journal. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. On this episode, Derrell Peel analyzes cattle markets. Lowell Sandell looks at the yield impact of volunteer corn. Amit Jhala talks about weed resistance issues. And Kurtis looks at the growth of agricultural education programs in Nebraska high schools. Oklahoma State Extension livestock marketing specialist Derrell Peel is our cattle market analyst this week. Last week's USDA reports on grain stocks and planted acres have weighed down corn prices. While that provides a cheaper ration for feeders, the amount of money they'll have to pay in order to buy the animals to put into feedlots remains high. We talked with Derrell Tuesday morning about these profit margins, selling this year's calf crop, and drought effects in Oklahoma and Texas.
You know, over the last month or 6 weeks, we've seen some relief across much of the region, some of the hardest drought hit region. We've moderated those drought conditions. We still have drought conditions. They're less severe at the moment. The challenge I think we have is that it's the middle of summer now. We've got summer heat in place, and so it's going to be very difficult to continue to get enough moisture and make improvements. I think it's probably more likely over the next few weeks that we will actually go backwards a little bit on these conditions. But the good news is that in late May and June, with the rains that came, we have produced some summer forage and some hay production. That's going to do a lot to help producers get through this period and at least get us into the fall.
Has that drought made a long-term change in either cattle feeding in Texas or in production of your region?
Well, certainly the numbers are way down. The drought was most severe going back to 2011 in the southern plains. And if you look at the numbers today, Texas, for example, is down about 1 million head of cows. Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico are all still down. That's been reflected not only obviously in cow-calf and stocker production in the region, but we've also seen some impacts there in feedlot numbers. For much of this year, Texas has had reduced numbers. This last cattle on feed report, Texas had fairly large placements. But the bottom line is, I think the cattle feeding industry in the southern plains has been affected not only by the drought, but probably by some longer-term structural issues as well. And I think there's an indication that probably the overall share of cattle feeding in the southern plains is changing a little bit over time.
Both live and feeder cattle futures are at record high levels. What would cause a drag on either of those markets?
You know, we've got prices at record levels in both the cash and futures markets, and I don't see a lot of downside risk in this market. It's pretty scary to think about being at record levels and suggesting we still have even potential to go a little bit higher, and yet I think that's probably a greater possibility at this point than any significant decrease, at least in terms of cattle industry fundamentals. Certainly some shocks could come up, but with corn markets looking very favorable from a cattle feeding perspective, other factors in place, it looks like we can sustain these record levels. We have potential to push even higher. We've seen a dramatic decrease in beef production in the first half of the year, and we may see a little bit of seasonal increase before the summer's over in terms of cattle slaughter and beef production, but we're going to be down sharply for the year, and that's going to continue to support these prices near record levels.
Well, cow-calf producers seem to be in the driver's seat, especially in states like Nebraska, where we have received a lot of rain. Are there any considerations those producers should take into account before they decide to sell those weaned calves?
Well, I think, as you said, cow-calf producers are definitely in the driver's seat, so it's kind of hard to make a mistake that's going to cost you at least a lack of profitability this year. We're anticipating on average that cow-calf producers will enjoy record levels of returns in 2014 and 2015 as well. So, you know, it's pretty easy to be somewhat successful in this market. Having said that, I think cow-calf producers still need to, you know, take advantage of the opportunities here. There's obviously challenges in managing cost of production. Those factors are going to continue to push up. There's still opportunities to add value to these calves by not just you know, selling them at weaning, but preconditioning programs or retained ownership programs, especially through the backgrounding phase, to put on additional weight. All have value possibilities that producers ought to at least evaluate before they make a decision on how to market these calves. You know, one other consideration, obviously we're in a situation where we're trying to retain heifers, not only this year, but for the next several years. I think thinking about how to market heifers maybe differently than steers is something to consider this year as well.
Finally, Darrell, a big concern that remains is the cost of meat. Have producers shown that they've been blinking at the current price levels?
You know, maybe it's a surprise to a lot of folks that demand has held up so well so far this year. Both domestic demand and the international demand appear to be very robust. They're supporting these prices at this point. We're certainly in uncharted waters in terms of this level of demand with the reduction we've got in quantity in the market. You know, prices are rationing that limited supply, but at this point in time, the demand is holding up very well. There seems to be no real indication of, you know, the kind of consumer pushback that will really fail to sustain the markets at the levels we're at. And you know, it's sort of a so far so good kind of a thing. Certainly we will continue to monitor it as we go forward, but it looks very promising at this point in time. There's the beef industry. Beef demand is certainly getting some help with higher pork prices, and poultry prices have come up somewhat in recent weeks. So, you know, meat prices are high across the board, and consumers will react not only to higher beef prices, but to all meat and all protein sources at the same time.
Next week, we'll look at corn and soybean market reaction to the USDA's July crop report with Jeff Peterson from Heartland Farm Partners. In what's seemingly a widespread problem across Nebraska this year, volunteer corn has found a home in many soybean fields. What yield impacts could that have when harvest rolls around? At one of this week's herbicide-resistant weed management field days, sponsored by the Nebraska Soybean Board, we discuss the problem with UNL Extension weed science educator Lowell Sandell. Has controlling volunteer corn, has that become more of a problem in recent years?
Yeah, with the increased adoption of glyphosate-resistant corn for weed control in corn, you get volunteers the next year in soybeans that can be kind of a competitive issue, and we see more and more of it every year, it seems like.
How much yield could that take away from soybeans?
It's really all density dependent. If producers have you know, real low density out there, it's probably not very impactful upon yield. But if they have a situation where a combine wasn't set quite right, or if weather causes ear drop or anything like that, you can get pretty heavy, occasionally get heavy volunteer corn infestations.
And that we're talking about a yield hit of what?
If it's allowed to compete with soybeans for an extended period of time, V3, V4, you can probably lose 10 to 30% yield on that, just from that early season competition.
Does that mean that it's very important to control volunteer corn early in the season?
We typically think or recommend to folks to control it with a first post-emergence pass. I think a lot of folks will wait till a second pass. The issue is, there's two issues with that. The first one being is if it's a fairly dense stand, it's just that much more competition with the soybeans for another week or two. And then the second one is the graminicides that we use to kill it, products like Select Max or Assure 2 or any of the equivalent type of products out there. They're very rate dependent for control on how big the corn gets. So the longer they wait, they should probably think about adjusting the rate a little bit higher, which costs more money.
Yeah, that could affect cost. Now, can it also impact yield in corn if you were to go corn on corn?
Yeah, it's same situations with soybeans. If it's a relatively low density, there's probably not a lot of impact on corn. But if you do again have those situations where it's a very dense problem of volunteer corn, it can certainly negatively impact corn yield as well.
With the soybean varieties we're seeing now, will it become even harder to control in the future?
That's a good question. It really depends on what the traits are in that corn, and whether whether what we use in our soybean herbicide program will work on it. And I think we're still going to be very reliant upon the graminicides for post volunteer corn control. So you know, new traits may have an impact, but it'll probably be relatively minimal.
Should it impact anyway the way you select your soybean varieties the next season?
I think producers should select soybean varieties based on yield. But just also think about what you did in the previous corn year, and if you need to make any adjustments in your soybean year based on the traits that are in that volunteer corn.
On the Market Journal website, we'll link to more information about volunteer corn influences on potential yield. Good soil and water conservation practices don't occur overnight. Don Bloss of Pawnee City has made it a 40-year project to get to the soil protection he now has on his rolling crop ground. You can read about this conservation evolution in the July Nebraska Farmer. Early in his farming career, Bloss witnessed plenty of erosion on those hills. Now he uses 100% no-till on his corn, soybeans, sorghum, and wheat acres. And he continues to add tile outlet terraces to keep the soil in place and his land productive. Bloss has relied on local, state, and federal incentives to develop his conservation program. You can learn more about this in the July Nebraska Farmer. At the recent Weed Management Field Day near Clay Center, we spoke with UNL Extension weed specialist Amit Jhala. If you look across your land now and see your weed management program has provided clean fields, Amit says you should do something different next year. Earlier in June, UNL confirmed yet another resistance issue within the state. The latest addition is the resistance of common ragweed to glyphosate. The problem has previously been reported in 14 other states. Nebraska's confirmed population survived doses up to 8 times the labeled rate. Because of how hard it's becoming for farmers to handle weeds after crops grow, we started our interview with Amit talking about why pre-emergence control is so important.
Pre-emergence herbicides are especially important in soybeans because in soybeans effective post-emergence herbicides are very limited, and pre-emergence herbicides are more in soybeans. And also considering the issues of herbicide resistant weeds and the way new weed species are developing resistant, I think to go for pre-emergence application is getting more and more important.
How much more challenging is it to control those weeds post-emergence?
It will be really challenging in case of certain weed species, for example common water hemp that we already have is glyphosate resistant, plus most of the common water hemp that we have tested from different 10 counties, they were also resistant to ALS group of herbicides like those pursuit and those brands that have been used for the last many years. So now if you think about only post-emergence control options in soybeans, we do have only PPO inhibiting herbicides like Cobra, Ultra Blazer, Flagstar, but in Illinois, my colleague, they have reported common water hemp that is resistant to glyphosate, that is resistant to ALS group of herbicides, and that is also resistant to PPO inhibiting herbicides. So in that case, we really do not have any option to control that particular multiple herbicide resistant common water hemp in soybean, especially with only post-emergence herbicide application in Roundup Ready soybean.
And you noted today it can be, a couple feet tall right now, or it can still emerge in August.
Right. So that is the problem to deal with common water hemp is it is just keep emerging throughout the growing season. Like you will see some tall 6-inch tall water hemp plant right now, and you will also see a new seedling of common water hemp is emerging nearby. So that's why it can easily escape post-emergence herbicide application. And so now my recommendation for that is there are a number of herbicides in soybean that are registered. You can also, they are residual herbicides that can be applied pre-emergence, but they are also registered for post-emergence application. So I would suggest to include any of those residual herbicides in a tank mix with post-emergence herbicide. That might be appropriate way to provide some more residual activity, especially for those water hemp and velvet leaf that are emerging later in the season.
One of the things you said today was the modes of action that we have right now are probably what we're going to have for the next few years because it's so expensive to develop new modes of action. What does that mean for the farmer?
That means those days were gone where they were depending on only post-emergence application of herbicides, and I think now growers need to think about their herbicide program, try to incorporate residual herbicides with multiple modes of actions. Like in last few years, there are several new herbicides came to the market. They were not a brand new herbicide chemistries, but they were tank mixture of already existing herbicides, but they can provide different mode of action, and that might be effective for control of herbicide resistant weeds as well as some other weed species that are hard to control.
You said the take-home message today is if your weed control program worked well this year, it's time to change it next year.
Yes, and that is still, I would stick with that because if you will keep using the same herbicides, doesn't matter if it is residual or post-emergence or any herbicide, it will evolve herbicide resistant weeds if it will be used repeatedly for few years. So the best message will be just keep rotating your herbicide program, and remember that if your herbicide program is working excellent this year, you still need to come up with some other herbicide options next year, and try to make ABCD like 4 or 5 herbicide programs, and that may include different herbicide mode of actions.
We'll have more information on weed control in future episodes, including next week when we'll look at managing spray drift with UNL Extension cropping system specialist Greg Kruger. Agricultural education is becoming a more prominent part of high school curriculums throughout Nebraska. There are currently more than 7,200 FFA members in the state, and over 13,000 students were enrolled in ag courses this past school year. While demand for ag programs continues to rise, there may not be enough teachers to go around. Market Journal's Kurtis reports on the shortage of ag educators in the state.
There's good news and bad news for agricultural education in Nebraska. Starting with the good, demand for agricultural education is stronger than ever. In the last 4 years, 30 high schools added ag programs and FFA chapters in the state. However, it's increasingly difficult to fill some of these open teaching jobs. Matt Kreifels is the Director of Agricultural Education in Nebraska. He says the demand for ag teachers is outweighing the supply.
Our critical issue right now is actually finding enough teachers to fill all these new positions. In addition to that, we also have a good number of teachers that are on the cusp of retirement. In fact, 20% of our teachers could retire in the next 3 years. We're doing our best to try to recruit and retain as many teachers as possible to fill this need.
J.C. Palmer is in her 3rd year of teaching agriculture at Chambers Public Schools. Ag education was a new program for the school when she started. Palmer says modern ag programs are increasingly diverse and expose students to a variety of different subjects.
There's tremendous opportunities in the world of agriculture, from the traditional farming ranching careers that sometimes we think of to the more advanced agri-science, ag biotechnology options that exist. I think when we teach agricultural courses, we don't always realize how broad of a career spectrum we're preparing students for.
From UNL graduations in December of 2013 and May of 2014, a total of 9 students graduated with agricultural education degrees. Due to the strength of the ag industry in Nebraska, only about half of those students ended up with teaching jobs.
Because agriculture is doing so well, we're competing with industry who like to sometimes take some of our candidates that will be great teachers and take them into industry. As an ag teacher, they're trained in all areas across the agricultural industry and are usually pretty good communicators, being a teacher, which is in high demand also for industry right now.
Matt Dolch was a 2010 graduate from UNL's Agricultural Education program. Since that time, he has been employed as a sales representative for Syngenta. Dolch feels the skills he gained and developed in the ag education program at UNL cross over well with his current occupation.
Agricultural education was the baseline for my career now. I feel like it opened doors to a lot of different avenues in agriculture, from sales, livestock, through crop protection and crop products, all the way through just educational purposes and how we can teach people each and every day. And going out into the field, there's a need for high quality individuals that are able to teach other people about agriculture and tell the story.
Getting involved in agricultural education was an easy choice for Kurt Vandewall. Vandewall is beginning his 13th year as an ag instructor with Fillmore Central Public Schools. He enjoys working with students and teaching them about the importance of the ag industry.
Well, considering that Nebraska, for one, is a huge employer of agriculture, and there's a lot of opportunities for agriculture, and everybody is a consumer of agriculture, they benefit on all levels of being educated about where their food comes from, how their food's produced, and the opportunities that are out there for a good career and good life.
The shortage of ag teachers in Nebraska has led Nebraska's Farm Bureau Foundation for Agriculture to invest in future instructors. Deanna Karmazine is the executive director of the foundation and says there are new assistance programs designed to help potential ag teachers overcome financial obstacles.
We decided to start a loan forgiveness program. And so what it is about $1,200 when a student is student teaching, and then also a loan program. So each year, if they stay in within 5 years, it goes up $250 a year. So by the end of 5 years, if they stay within agricultural education in a school system here in Nebraska, it'll be equivalent to about $6,200, which is equivalent to about half of their tuition that will be paid back by Farm Bureau's Foundation for Ag.
The Nebraska Farm Bureau's Foundation for Agriculture hopes these assistance programs will alleviate financial burdens potential teachers may experience while encouraging them to pursue long careers teaching agricultural education.
You don't become rich teaching. You teach because of a passion. You teach because you want to make a difference. So we're doing what we can to fulfill that need. You know, a starting salary for a teacher is $31,000 a year, and if we can take away their loan issues, it's going to help them, you know, to become more successful more quickly.
In 2014, 8 new agricultural education and FFA chapters will be added to Nebraska schools, bringing the total to 157 programs. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Kurtis Harms.
New ag educators interested in these assistance programs need to belong to a member family, have their own membership, or be a student member of the Nebraska Farm Bureau to be eligible. We'll link to more information on these programs on our website. Now, with this week's weather forecast, here's UNL Extension State Climatologist Al Dutcher.
Well, folks, here again for the weekly forecast. During this last week, we pretty much had scattered convection activity almost every single day, with the worst of the activity in the Wednesday afternoon through Thursday morning time frame, where we had significant hail reports coming from north central through south central Nebraska and portions of west central Nebraska, particularly in that area from North Platte eastward toward Grand Island, and then intersect north and south from there. Now, this has been kind of the trend the entire summer, where when we do get thunderstorm activity, it's been accompanied by significant hail. And unfortunately, to undo the drought, we need the rainfall, but it's come at a pretty steep price. And as we go through this next 7-day period, the main attention we're going to be talking about is this very cool air that is expected to move into the northern plains and then eventually sag into our region as we get into the early part of next week. And it'll be more like fall-like weather, but it will bring a halt to the precipitation, at least temporarily, before we start to see it increase or increasing chances as we get late into next week. So as we go to the upper air models, the first thing I'll draw your attention to is here is that polar jet that is starting to carve out across the Great Lakes, expected to push toward the south and southwest as we go through this weekend, and that will bring a surface cold front through Nebraska. So for today, we would expect to see thunderstorm activity with the best chance, at least during the first half of the day, across the northern part of the state. And as this cold front tries to slip southward, we may see some activity breaking out across southern Nebraska. Now, as we go into tomorrow, you can see that this cold air is now pushing southwestward. So on the fringe of this would be our best activity for thunderstorms, and that will also be able to intersect, at least in western Nebraska, some of this monsoon moisture that's moving up through the central Rockies to give us once again a chance for scattered thunderstorm activity. It doesn't look to be a significant event, but anything that develops is likely to be accompanied by, unfortunately, some severe weather. Now, as we go into Monday, we firmly see that this cold pocket is pushed well to the south, so the main precipitation band will lay right along this frontal edge, so we'd be looking at the central Rockies out through the southern plains, and we should start to see a drying trend established here on Monday across our region, and that will continue as we go into Tuesday. We'll start to see this low shift toward our east, and we'll basically stay in a northerly flow at the surface, so very cool temperatures. We'll be looking at highs consistently in the 70s statewide, and we may not even break out of the upper 60s across extreme northern Nebraska. Now, as we go into Wednesday, that trough starts to weaken somewhat, and we start to see some of the warmer air pushing into our region, so we will see the chance for scattered thunderstorm activity developing in the western part of the state, particularly intersecting some of that monsoon moisture, and as that warmer air tries to butt up against this cooler air, that is where the main activity should develop. As we go into Thursday, we'll start to see that trough weakening. That's going to bring some of the warmer air back into our region. That's going to increase our chances for thunderstorm activity, particularly over northeast and eastern Nebraska. And as we get into Friday, this trough lifts out, and we start to see the much warmer air move into our region. And of course, our thunderstorm chances will continue to increase. So if we look at the temperature forecast, we are looking at some warm temperatures this weekend with those chances for thunderstorm activity ending as we get into Monday morning, then a cool trend as we go through the middle part of next week, and slowly warming toward the end of the week. 8 to 14-day forecast shows cooler than normal conditions holding in, but it's breaking down. We expect that as we get into the later half of the weekend, we will probably see above normal temperatures. In regards to precipitation, below normal to our north, and you can see this monsoon moisture slowly sliding our way. So as we get into late next week, we would expect to see pretty active weather across the region.
Thanks, Al. Today's interviews on cattle markets, controlling volunteer corn, weed resistance, and ag education programs in Nebraska high schools can be found individually on the Market Journal website and through the Market Journal mobile app. Next week, Jeff Peterson will analyze corn and soybean markets after the July crop report, and Greg Kruger will discuss managing spray drift. Until then, thanks for watching. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. We'll see you next week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board. The Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board.
Soybeans are found on dinner tables around the world. Some form of the soybean is found in baby foods, snacks, cooking oils, and many other food items eaten daily. And soybeans provide the protein in the diets for livestock and fish. The Nebraska soybean farmers support research to develop new soy-based products for foods, livestock, and industrial uses through their checkoff dollars. The Nebraska Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.